Did you know that Morocco's tomato industry is a $1 billion agricultural engine running at peak output? They are currently the leading supplier to the UK and the top third country supplier to the EU. But there's a hidden risk. Over 92% of their exports are locked into just one geopolitical zone. With trade tensions rising across the Mediterranean and local producers pushing back, the Moroccan government has just launched a bold new strategy. They have introduced a powerful financial lever, a 750 dirham per ton subsidy, to force a massive shift in the global supply chain. What is the sudden pivot, and can it really de-risk a $1 billion industry? Let's find out.
Okay, so we're talking about fresh tomatoes today. But believe me, this isn't really a story about farming. It's about geopolitics, it's about smart economics, and it's about a really clever strategy to protect a $1 billion industry. We're going to break down exactly how Morocco is getting ahead of the curve and reshaping its entire tomato trade to protect itself from future shocks.
So to really get why Morocco is making such a big move, you first have to understand the sheer scale of their success. Let's just look at the numbers for a second.
I mean, the scale here is just staggering. We're talking about more than 767,000 tons of tomatoes in just 1 year. That brought in over $1.15 billion. This makes Morocco an absolute global heavyweight. They're the European Union's #1 supplier from outside the bloc, and they're the top dog in the UK market too. It's a massive agricultural engine, and it's firing on all cylinders. So on the surface, everything looks fantastic, right? Record revenues, total market dominance. But what if that very success is hiding a critical weakness? What if the whole foundation of this empire is a little more fragile than it looks? Yeah, this success story, it's got a pretty big flaw. When you start to peel back the layers, you find this invisible risk, a single point of failure that's been hiding in plain sight this whole time. And this one number, this is the whole key to understanding Morocco's hidden risk: 92.18%. It represents a massive, massive concentration of trade, and well, a massive vulnerability. So what does that 92% actually mean? It means almost all of Morocco's $1 billion tomato industry depends on just two customers, the European Union and the United Kingdom. So yeah, they're having record-breaking success, but the entire model is propped up by the stability of European trade. Any little disruption over there could be absolutely catastrophic. And that risk, it isn't just some theory anymore. It's starting to create very real friction across the Mediterranean. The success itself is actually becoming part of the problem. Morocco's dominance is now causing some serious pushback from local producers, especially over in Spain and France. They're raising suspicions of unfair competition. Now, to be perfectly clear, no formal proof of these claims has ever been established. But you know what? It doesn't really matter. The political pressure is building, and that alone makes the whole situation unsustainable in the long run. So, faced with this crazy dependency and growing political heat, Morocco isn't just sitting around waiting for a crisis. Nope, it's developed a very targeted, very clever new policy to solve the problem before it gets any worse. The solution dropped on March 5th with a new government decree. You can think of it like a big financial lever. It's a subsidy of about $5.70 for every single ton of tomatoes exported to markets outside of Europe and the UK, with a real strategic focus on Africa. But here's the crucial part. This is not a simple handout. It's what's called a performance-based subsidy, and that means it's a precision tool, not a blunt instrument. So how does it actually work? Okay, this is the really clever part. The government set a benchmark, a baseline, using their historical export averages. The subsidy only kicks in for export volumes that go above that line. That's what you see here in the active subsidy zone. This makes sure that the money is funding real expansion into new markets, not just propping up the existing trade they already have. It is precisely engineered for new growth. And you can see the effect right here. This export decree, it acts like a wedge, rerouting the entire supply chain. It creates what you could call a diversification funnel, actively pushing all that new volume away from that 92% European concentration and steering it toward new growth in places like Africa. It directly tackles that dangerous dependency head on. So what does all this add up to? Well, it's not just some minor tweak. This represents a fundamental shift in Morocco's entire export strategy. They're moving from just being a passenger to being the pilot, actively shaping their own economic future. You can really see the massive shift when you compare the before and after. Historically, the target was the EU and the UK. Now, it's Africa and the rest of the world. Growth used to be driven by just being dominant. Now, it's driven by these smart subsidies. And the friction, it goes from high with France and Spain to low because they're opening totally new trade corridors. The government has gone from being a passive beneficiary to an active architect of its supply chains. And the main risk is no longer relying on a single market, but instead, it's about the logistical challenge of making it all work in these new markets. Ultimately, this whole strategy combines three key things: targeted policy with the export aid, smart economics to get away from that 92% concentration, and savvy geopolitics to sidestep all that European trade friction. And the goal is simple: create sustainable, de-risk growth for an absolutely vital industry. So the key insight here is this: Morocco isn't just reacting to a problem. It's using these precision financial tools to proactively take apart its own vulnerabilities before anyone can exploit them. It really is a masterclass in strategic foresight. And this leaves us with a fascinating final thought. We live in an increasingly volatile world, right? With trade alliances constantly shifting. Could this Moroccan strategy, using targeted, performance-based incentives to literally engineer diversification, be the new playbook for how other nations can protect their own key industries? It's a powerful question to think about.
Welcome to The Debate. Imagine running a perfectly humming billion-dollar business, breaking output records year after year.
Right.
And then out of nowhere, you just decide to pay your people to divert your best product to, entirely unproven markets. That is exactly what Morocco is doing right now with its fresh tomato industry.
Yeah, so the government just passed this decree on March 5th, right? Introducing a new subsidy of 750 dirhams, which is about 5.70 US dollars per ton. And the explicit goal here is to push tomato exports away from Europe and redirect them toward Africa and other international markets.
Exactly. And, to me, this isn't just an agricultural policy. I argue that it's a vital, proactive move to break a really dangerous geographic reliance before it breaks them.
See, and I come at it from a completely different way. I look at this and frankly, I see a logistical overreach. My position is that this policy severely underestimates the value and honestly the sheer stability of the European trade flows they already have.
Well, let's look at the actual scale of the risk here. Right now, a staggering 92.18% of Moroccan tomato exports are locked into a single geopolitical zone.
Wow, 92%.
Yeah, you've got 75.6% going to the EU, and then over 16% to the UK. It looks like total market dominance, sure, but it's basically like holding your entire retirement fund in a single increasingly volatile tech stock.
Volatile? I mean, come on. In 2024, Morocco hit a record output of over 767,000 tons.
Which is massive.
Exactly. The total export value was $1.15 billion. You are talking about a perfectly functioning agricultural engine. Why would any government deliberately disrupt that over, mere suspicions of trade friction?
Because those suspicions are quickly turning into really serious political pressure. I mean, French and Spanish producers are getting incredibly loud about alleged unfair competition.
Sure, they are loud, but
Morocco is essentially playing a game of geopolitical chess here. They're using these subsidies to pivot and de-risk the sector before Europe can just drop the tariff hammer. You really have to diversify before the crash, not after.
I hear the geopolitical theory, I really do. But let's look at the physical reality. Morocco is the unquestioned #1 third country supplier to Europe. There is absolutely no formal proof of these labeling or tax irregularities that European producers keep complaining about.
Well, formal proof or not, the threat is there.
But more importantly, you're trying to fix a political problem with a tiny financial band-aid. I mean, practically speaking, a $5.70 per ton payout is not going to magically offset the massive hurdles of establishing supply chains in Africa.
I wouldn't call it a band-aid. The brilliance of the decree is actually in its precision engineering.
How so?
It's not just a blanket payout where they, hand out cash for every tomato shipped. The funds are strictly performance-based. They only activate for export volumes that exceed a specific 10-year historical baseline.
Which is what, exactly?
It's specifically the average shipments between September 2010 and August 2020. By only paying out for shipments that exceed that baseline, the government guarantees they aren't just paying farmers for routes they were already taking.
So it really only kicks in for the growth.
Right, it explicitly forces them to find new buyers and create real, net new markets, all without deliberately cannibalizing their existing European revenue stream.
Okay, well, forcing them to find new buyers is fine on paper, but you cannot just toss highly perishable tomatoes into the back of a truck and point it south.
Well, obviously not.
Right, you are essentially trying to build a moving refrigerator across an entire continent. Shipping fresh produce across Africa requires an incredibly complex cold chain logistics network.
True.
A baseline transport payout of 750 dirhams per ton doesn't build refrigerated distribution centers, it doesn't pave roads.
That is a very fair point about the infrastructure deficit. I agree. The subsidy itself obviously doesn't pour concrete or build massive refrigeration plants.
Exactly.
But what it does do is absorb the initial shock of the higher transport costs for the exporters who are willing to pioneer those new routes. It acts as a catalyst.
A very small catalyst.
Maybe. But once the trade routes become financially viable to explore, private sector infrastructure investment usually follows the volume. It's a calculated seed investment, not a complete infrastructure bill.
I just remain highly skeptical that it is enough of a catalyst. Swapping guaranteed European revenues for theoretical African growth is a massive gamble, especially when you're up against those brutal cold chain realities. I am sorry, but I just don't buy that a minor financial incentive alone solves major physical infrastructure problems.
Well, we definitely agree on one thing. This sector is operating at absolute peak output, and protecting that billion-dollar industry is paramount.
Unquestionably.
From my vantage point, this decree is a smartly structured, performance-based shield against an inevitable European backlash.
And I think we will soon see if the execution can actually match the geopolitical theory.
We absolutely will. It leaves us with a critical question to watch. Will this strategic paradigm shift successfully secure long-term global growth, or will it unnecessarily fracture a winning formula? As this diversification era unfolds, there is absolutely more to explore in the data. Thanks for joining the discussion.